You SA a 15-year-old girl and sodomize her, and then you chop off 2 of her limbs, throw her off of a cliff to bleed out and die. Hi friends, my name is Sam. I am a makeup artist and a horror connoisseur, and this is the first episode of Sunday Scaries, a brand new series where on Sundays you and I sit down and we get over that pre-Monday panic by going over eerie mysteries, true crime cases, and all things. Quick warning that this episode does contain very sensitive subjects and themes of SA, so if those things make you uncomfortable, please take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next Sunday Scaries episode. Mary was born in 1963. She was one of 7 kids born into a military family. Her parents' names were Lucy and Herb. They all resided in Las Vegas. Her mom was a blackjack dealer, while her dad was actually a mechanic that worked on the casino machines. So although there were 7 kids, they did live like a middle-class life, and they seemed like a pretty normal family, which is not really the case. Mary was kind of stuck in this family that was abusive. Her dad was abusive, both physically and mentally, and her mom just was rather absent. At 15 years old, Mary ended up running away, and when I was looking into this case and doing research, I saw a lot of people reporting that the reason Mary ran away was because she was rebellious in nature and just kind of wanted to like go out and like fuck around. And in an interview that I watched with Mary, she states that this is not the case at all. In fact, she says, and I quote, "I left home to save my life. I wasn't seeking wild times." So basically what happened the day that Mary ran away was one of her sisters said to her, like, "Dad is coming home and he's coming home early from work because he's mad at you about something." So because of, living in this abusive home, to Mary, that was like, I'm gonna get my ass beat, so I'm fucking out of here. So Mary ended up running away to avoid whatever wrath her father was coming home with that day. After a while of sleeping in unlocked cars and barely scraping by, Mary decided she was done with this BS and kind of wanted to go home, but, wasn't ready to face her parents, especially her dad, considering she ran away the day he was coming home to basically ream her out for something. So Mary kind of thought it through and was like, I will go stay with my grandpa instead because that's kind of a little piece of home. And then she decided to hitchhike to her grandfather's house in Berkeley, California. One thing I feel we must note here is as soon as I read that, I was like, girl, what? But let's remember what year this is taking place in, and hitchhiking was not only normal, but very common, and people did it all the time. It's not like now, if your friend was like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna hitchhike to my grandpa's house, you'd be like, bitch, take an Uber. What? So it's different. Mary successfully hitchhikes to her grandpa's house in Berkeley, California. She's with her grandpa for a few nights and then is like, okay, I actually just want to fucking go home. I'm super homesick. I've been sleeping in these cars and now I'm at my grandpa's house. It's fine, but I just missed my house. I missed my home. So she decides she's going to hitchhike back to Las Vegas, which is a 9-hour journey from her grandpa's house. She's hitchhiked before successfully. She's not, worried about it or anything. She's never had a bad experience. Mary ends up getting a ride from somebody, but they can only take her halfway, which is totally fine. Mary accepts the ride and she gets halfway there where she's dropped off and she meets up with 2 other hitchhikers who are also going to Las Vegas. Now Mary is standing on the side of the road with these 2 other hitchhikers and they're holding signs that say where they're going. And the 3 of them are basically just hoping and praying that somebody is going to show up and say, hey, I can take the 3 of you back to Las Vegas. Let's go. After a few hours of standing there and hoping and praying that somebody shows up, somebody shows up. A older gentleman in a blue van pulls up beside the 3 of them and, kind of gestures Mary over. And Mary's like, fuck yeah, let's go. I'm going home. I'm sick of this shit. Let's not forget, Mary's been sleeping in cars, right? Unlocked cars. That can't be a good, cozy nighttime. Like, you don't go into somebody's car and go like, oh, bedtime, like gonna have the best sleep of my life. She has probably been on alert for a really long time, and she is just so eager to get back home. And her grandpa's house, she didn't feel good. She was feeling homesick. So when this older gentleman pulled up in this blue van, for her, this was like, okay, I'm finally gonna be able to go home. He's kind of, like beer belly, like doesn't look like this, strong, intimidating man. He, in fact, kind of just reminded her of her grandfather, who she was just spending a few days with. So when this guy pulled up, it was almost like a form of comfort for her, because she was kind of like, okay, he's literally somebody's grandpa. Like, this is gonna be fine. But then he said something weird. So the three of them were, looking at this van, and it was like a work van where there's like two seats, the driver's seat, the passenger seat, and then the back of the van where like there's no seats and you would fill it with, like work equipment or whatnot. This is when he says to Mary, I can take you to Las Vegas. Like, I can take you exactly where you need to go, but I only have room for one, and I will only take a girl. Meaning Mary. So, what the fuck do you mean, sir? Like, the three of them are looking kind of like in his van, and they're like, homeboy definitely has room back there for not just us three, but like a fucking whole group of people. The other two hitchhikers are kind of like, okay, Mary, like, that's a little suspicious, don't you think, girl? They say to Mary, like, girl, like, it's giving red flags on wheels. Like, don't get in this van. Like, are you seeing what we're seeing? Like, there's enough room in that van for the three of us and then some. Like, he could take everybody at this fucking place. And Mary is kind of thinking to herself, like, I just want to go home. Like, nobody has come in like hours. This is the first person who's come up and said that, he can take me exactly where I want to go, which is home. And Mary has hitchhiked so many times and nothing bad has ever happened. So Mary was kind of like, bye guys. Mary agrees, and she gets in the van with this guy, not knowing that this is really where her life is about to change forever. Mary's in this van. Everything seems totally fine. They're going in the right direction. Mary is so exhausted because she was standing there for hours waiting for somebody to come pick her up. And she's finally in this van with this, older gentleman who reminds her of her grandpa. And remember, hitchhiking back then was so normal. Like, Mary is not thinking twice about this situation. She's like, this guy is going exactly where I need to go. And he literally is a grandpa. Like, he's not this big, strong, spooky looking gentleman. He literally looks like my grandpa. And so Mary ends up falling asleep in the van because she is so exhausted from sleeping in cars, living on the streets, hitchhiking around. Like, she's so tired. She just wants to be home. And she finally feels like she's kind of safe right now because, she's not sleeping in somebody's unlocked car. She's on her way home. This is when Mary wakes up from her little slumber and realizes that he is taking her in the completely opposite direction. Mary freaks the fuck out at him. Like, she's not, casual about this at all. She looks at him and she's like, what the fuck are you doing? This is not the right direction. Turn around right now. The man, Lawrence Singleton, looks at Mary and he's so calm. Like, he's so collected. He's like, I'm so sorry. It was an honest mistake. I'm going to turn around right now. As soon as Mary saw that they were going the right way, she kind of bit her tongue. Like, she was still super uneasy about the situation, but she was like, okay, we're going the right way now. So, like, I'm going to chill out. I am getting a free ride. I'm just going to be more aware. And this is when shit truly hits the fan, because Singleton says to Mary, remember, they're going the right direction now. They're headed back to, towards Las Vegas. But Singleton says to Mary, hey, like, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to pull over up here because I really have to pee, and then we'll keep going. So Mary is, like, obviously still on edge and uneasy and kind of on guard, but, like, what's she going to say? Like, no, bitch, take me. Like, no, you don't get to pull over. They pull over. Singleton, pulls the van over kind of to, like, a secluded area, but I don't know, like, Mary doesn't think too much into that because he's pulling over to pee. Like, nobody wants to pee, like, where somebody's gonna see you, right? He gets out of the van to apparently relieve himself, and this is when Mary is really in her head. She's thinking, like, Okay, she's looking around and she looks down at her feet and she sees that her shoelace is untied. If anything bad happens, I'm gonna have to run, so I'm gonna tie my shoelace. Mary gets out of the van because he's out of the van, like peeing or whatever. So Mary gets out of the van to bend down, tie her shoe, and have a little stretch because she's been on a journey. Like, she's been sitting for a few hours at this point. Mary is bent over, tying her shoe, that she feels this awful pain in the back of her head. Singleton had just hit her in the back of the head with a sledgehammer that he was hiding beside him the entire time that he was driving her. But at this point, Mary is blacked out, but wakes up in the back of the van, and she is completely tied up. This is where Singleton would spend the rest of the night brutally essaying Mary and sodomizing her. Mary was begging to be let go. In fact, Mary said, and I quote, "Please set me free. Please set me free." This is something that she said multiple times to Singleton. And this is when Singleton looked at Mary and said to her, "You want me to set you free? I'll set you free." Singleton pulled out a hatchet, and with 5 swings, he hacked off both of her arms. While he was hacking off one of her arms, Mary was holding on to one of his arms with her other arm, screaming for her life. And Mary says that she remembers holding on to him so tight, but then falling backwards. And she was confused because she was saying to herself, like, I'm holding on to his forearm with all my strength right now. How am I falling? And then she sees Singleton kind of like flicking his arm, and it's Mary's cut off arm that is still attached to his forearm. He's trying to fling it off of him. After Singleton did this awful thing to Mary, he took her body and threw her off of a 30-foot cliff. He left Mary for dead. He basically thought that this poor little girl was going to just bleed out at the bottom of this cliff and die. He thought she would never be found, and he was, good to go. So Singleton takes off while Mary is at the bottom of this cliff. Despite what I can only imagine to be unimaginable pain, Mary says that she actually never passed out during this time period and was fully conscious the entire time that she was down there. Mary said, "I wanted to give up, I wanted to sleep, but I felt a presence down there with me, somebody telling me to get up, go get help, because if she didn't, somebody else would die." Let me remind you, this little girl is currently bleeding out. She's just been brutally essayed. She is completely naked. When he threw her down the cliff, the 30-foot cliff, she had no clothes on, and she is missing both of her arms, bleeding everywhere. She's missing her arms, and she knows that she needs to find a way to make this bleeding stop. Otherwise, she was going to die there at the bottom of the cliff. So Mary does the absolute smartest but most insane thing. Mary takes what's left of her arms and sticks them into the mud and the dirt. The reason that Mary did this was to try to stop the bleeding so that she did not pass out from blood loss and die. When I was going over this, I was thinking, like, that was probably the most painful thing that this little girl has ever had to do in her entire life. But thinking about it, like, I do wonder if she, like, even felt it at all. Like, at that point, I'm curious to know, do you feel anything, or are you just, like, in so much shock that, like, you feel nothing? I don't know. Oh my God. Mary sticks her arms in the mud to stop the bleeding and then begins to climb up this 30-foot cliff that she was thrown off of. Mary makes it to the top of the cliff and then basically begins to walk until she can't walk anymore or somebody finds her. After walking 3 full miles completely naked, she sees headlights. She sees a car approaching her and she is thinking, thank God, like, I'm going to make it. However, this car sees Mary completely naked, covered in blood, missing her arms, and they drive right past her. Mary says in an interview that she actually really doesn't blame these 2 people that were in the car who drove past her, because she can kind of understand how terrifying she looked. Thankfully, a second car comes by and it's actually a couple on vacation. I believe it was for their honeymoon. They do pull over. Thank fucking God. Mary is rushed to the hospital where she is taken care of. It's reported that Mary actually lost half of her blood. That is insane. I can't even imagine how lightheaded and like unwell she must have felt walking naked, no arms, covered in blood, probably moments from passing out, feeling like she's gonna die. Like 15. Mary Still immediately was working with detectives to put together a composite sketch so that they could find the man that did this to her. Mary actually gave such a detailed description that the composite sketch looked so much like Lauren Singleton that as soon as they released it to the public, somebody came forward and was like, bro, that's my neighbor. At the trial, Mary testified against him, stared him straight in the face, and ID'd him as her attacker. On her way out of the courthouse, she had to walk past Singleton, and he looked at her and said, and I quote, "I'll finish the job if it takes me the rest of my life." So that's fucking terrifying. This poor little girl, I can't even imagine. That would be like, what? Lauren Singleton was convicted of these heinous crimes. Thank God. However, the justice system really failed Mary here. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, which was the maximum time for this crime. When I read that, I was like, no. Like, I'm misinterpreting something. Like, I'm getting something wrong. Because I'm so sorry. You SA a 15-year-old girl and sodomize her, and then you chop off 2 of her limbs, throw her off of a cliff to bleed out and die, and 14 years is the maximum sentence? So sorry? Especially considering how he threatened Mary when she left the courtroom, saying that he would finish the job if it was the last thing he did. The worst part about that is now it's like Mary has to live in fear of that happening, but it truly gets worse. While Singleton was in prison, a prison psychiatrist said that Singleton was so out of touch and his rage was a danger to everybody. So, after spending 8 years of his sentence, Singleton was released for good behavior. 8 years. No, you heard me. Just because somebody has good behavior doesn't mean they're not capable and willing to do awful things. Look at John Wayne Gacy. He did awful, awful things and was like a model citizen. For this monster to be released on good behavior is such a letdown and so disheartening. The worst part about this is what Singleton did when he was released. That is it for this episode of Sunday Scaries. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. I would love to know what you think in the comments. And I will see you back here next Sunday for part 2 of this episode. Until next time, stay safe and stay spooky.